Hey there, fellow Florida beer enthusiast. We now have an official Patreon. In case you are unfamiliar, Patreon is a great way for a community to support the creators of the content you love, like the Florida Beer Podcast. If you're enjoying the content we bring you on this show, or any of the shows on the Florida Podcast Network, you can help ensure that content keeps coming through for a small monthly donation equal to the price of a couple cups of coffee a month. So for just a few lattes, you can make a real difference. And the first goal of FPN's Patreon program is to help me get a better mobile setup to use whenever I can start traveling to great breweries here in the state of Florida. So if today's episode brought you valuable insights and information, please help see that these episodes keep coming by becoming a patron. Head to patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network to support the show, and it comes with some pretty sweet benefits. Want access to bonus extras? Nostalgic for these old school radio shoutouts? Lover of good quality merchandise? Well, not only will your monthly contribution help me grow the show, but you'll get some cool stuff in return. So please head to patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network for further details to become a patron. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network. You can also find the link right there in the show notes or by visiting floridabeerpodcast.com. Thank you in advance for your continued support.
The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
Welcome back to the first July episode of the Florida Beer Podcast Coronavirus Quarantine Edition. We are still fighting this, and so we are still doing these episodes, as my guest laughs in the background. Yay! Oh, yeah. This is Dave, your host and author, and today we are actually going to be heading back to the Florida Brewers Guild. The first episode of our coronavirus coverage started with the current president, Mike Harding from Three Daughters Brewing. Now we're going to be chatting with their executive director, Sean Nordquist, and his amazing Twitter handle, Beer for the Daddy, which I definitely want to get the story behind. Sean, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.
So for people that don't actually understand or never heard of the Florida Brewers Guild before, what is the organization?
So we are a trade organization, and almost every state now in the country has a Brewers Guild of some kind. They all have various names, but we're a 501c6, so we participate in lobbying and talking with legislators and industry professionals about Florida craft beer law. Our number one focus is making the business environment in the state better for craft breweries. So whether that's issues with licensing, whether it's issues with distribution rules, permit costs, tax, all that kind of stuff, our primary focus is here in the state. And we also do some in conjunction with the Nationwide Brewers Association on the national level. And then the flip side of that is we also, we put on festivals, we do educational seminars, we do a conference every year, obviously not this year. And then, we have events that are public facing. So like our festivals, we do, a couple big ones each year. We do some smaller ones. We participate and partner with other organizations and also individual breweries to educate the general public about Florida craft breweries and also just beer in general. So the more people we get coming over to drinking local independent craft beer, the better.
Gotcha. And I would assume that all of your work in Tallahassee has sort of hit a fever pitch with the laws going around concerning beer.
Yeah, I would say, typically we have sort of a period of time during the year that we focus on legislative issues, and I'm based out of St. Petersburg, and we have our general counsel and lobbyist who lives and works in Tallahassee. And we spend a portion of the year, up in Tallahassee working on trying to get certain legislative items passed. I feel like I've had more legislative and government work done in the past 3 months than probably my entire stint as director of the guild. It's been a nonstop pretty much every day. And, every day is something new. Like we've talked about before, that, everything changes seemingly day to day.
So we're talking on Thursday, I think it's June 8th. In terms of the laws right now, how can breweries in the state operate?
It's tough. So we had, with the initial executive order that came out, and it's important to remember that these aren't laws per se, but they're executive orders from the governor and the department that oversees alcohol and that sort of thing. So with the initial executive order, everybody had to shut down, and the only thing that they could do was the manufacturing part stays functioning because manufacturing is considered an essential business. They could still do to-go orders, so package stuff out the door, crowlers, growlers, kegs, that kind of stuff, but no on-premise consumption. And then there was some question about whether or not they were allowed to do that because the executive orders weren't particularly clear. Then the next phase, came, and when they started allowing restaurants to open for on-premise, there was again question. But the breweries who had a restaurant license were allowed to open as a restaurant and serve on-premise, but still no sitting in the bar, no congregating. Everybody has to be seated, that kind of stuff. And then there was question whether or not the breweries who maybe didn't have their own restaurant, but frequently had food trucks or that sort of thing, could they operate in the same kind of way? And that was allowed for a couple of weeks. And then with this most recent, it was an emergency addendum to the executive order, which is, we start getting into addendum to this one, and an emergency change to this one. But the most recent one actually rolled it back. So what we're facing right now for breweries is if they don't have a food license of their own, meaning that they own, the license to either an on-site kitchen, or if they own the food truck under, they can have it on site. But if they don't have one of their own, they cannot be open for on-premise consumption.
No, I was going to say, because I know one of the people that I spoke with asked me, what if they just start selling food? What if they have like a caterer come inside? Or what if the food truck sales are rung up through the brewery's point of sale system? Does that count?
Well, technically, no, because from what we've been told by ABT and DVPR, they have to own the license, and they are actually going around and checking the licenses at these establishments. So, I mean, everybody is trying to do everything they can to stay open, and I get that. Mm-hmm. But this most recent round, they've been pretty straightforward and strict about it, saying, if you don't have the license, you cannot be open for on-premise. And it's not as simple as, okay, now we have, we're selling chips from behind the counter, or we're bringing in pizza from next door, or any of that kind of stuff. If you do not have the food license on site, you cannot be open for on-premise. When they initially did that, they also made it that it was 50% of your business had to be coming from food. They took that away. But where this gets frustrating is that means that everybody is now going to these restaurants that have bars, or bars that also have a restaurant license. And I've seen it even walking through St. Pete, that these places are packed. They're not following the guidelines. They're not following the social distancing. They're not wearing masks, and people are congregating and they're drinking. They might have an appetizer. They may be following the letter of the law. The spirit of the law is clearly being flouted. And then you have breweries who are well known for the most part, being extremely on top of sanitation and keeping things clean and following the guidelines, which they had been doing, but they get shut out of this. And at the same time, you've got a strip club in Miami that can open because they have a food license. Yeah. And I'd be willing to bet that there's no 6-foot distancing going on there. And the same with beach bars and all that kind of thing. So we're doing what we can, but there's been not a whole lot of flexibility on the enforcement side of things these days.
Gotcha. Well, I guess if the enforcement's not getting through, then you would have to go to the lawmakers themselves. And how are you sort of trying to work with them to adjust the policies that they have with COVID, especially, obviously, there was a very high-profile brewery up in Maine that decided to flout their laws, and they got shut down immediately. How can we help work with the lawmakers in Tallahassee, but not have the entire industry here in Florida punished because of, a few people like the beach bars that are going crazy?
That's a multi-part thing, because right now, the way that Florida law is written, there are certain things that simply can't be done by executive order. They can't just declare, okay, for self-distribution is legal, or now delivery is legal, or now home shipping is legal. Those are actually written into statute that they are specifically prohibited. And the governor can't just make an executive order saying, all right, well, we're going to overwrite this law because I'm the governor. Other states don't have those things written into statute, so they're able to make adjustments. And that's what, there's a lot of states that have said, okay, well, for the next 90 days, shipping is illegal or delivery is illegal or whatever, because they aren't explicitly prohibited in their law. So that's one thing that people need to understand when people say, well, why can't Florida just do this? And that's why. We also have to recognize that those things that have to be done legislatively, our legislature doesn't meet again until March. So even if 100% of our legislature was on board with changing all the rules to allow all the breweries to open under these current circumstances, that wouldn't be happening until 2021 anyway. So, but calling these legislators, letting them know what's going on, letting them know about the support of the craft beer industry, the importance of the craft beer industry, and keep hitting them with that over and over again, puts our industry in their mind. So when the time does come, and of course we've got an election coming up, so some of those legislators will be around, some won't. There will be some new ones out there. When we come to them and say, okay, here's what we want, here's what we need, and we can point to businesses that were affected during COVID, that will be a powerful tool. The other way to support breweries right now is just to support them. The ones that can only do to go right now, instead of the trip by Publix, to pick up your six-pack, go by the brewery, pick up growlers, buy six-packs from the brewery, buy kegs from the brewery, and take them home and have a party socially distanced with your neighbors. Those are the big ways to be able to support the industry right now, and putting pressure on the governor and DVPR to maybe look at how breweries are designated. Right now, they're designated manufacturers, they're designated retailers, they're designated, with a 2 COP, which is a consume on premise, or 4 COP, which are consume on premise. So they don't have their own category when it comes to the sort of thing. So they get lumped in. All bars are either 2 COP or 4 COP.
Gotcha.
And so if they don't have a food license, they just get lumped in with the other 20, 30,000 bars that are in the state.
Obviously, the gold standard for positivity of craft beer in a state legislature would be Colorado, with John Hickenlooper being a brewer himself before he became governor there. Are there a lot of pro-craft beer legislators that we have in Tallahassee right now?
Oh, for sure. And the great thing about it is it's a nonpartisan or bipartisan, depending on how you want to issue, especially the ones that have breweries in their districts. The legislators in the Orlando area, there are legislators in the Tampa Bay area, Tallahassee. I mean, a lot of them frequent these craft breweries, and, they'll hold events there, or they'll just, they're down the street, so they go visit them. So there are quite a few that are ready and willing to go to bat for the industry. They recognize, not just because they like them, but they recognize the impact and importance for the community.
And I was going to say, there's a strong emphasis on the economy as well. Are craft breweries becoming a not insignificant part of Florida's economy?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just, the report that came out for 2019, so it came out just actually a couple months ago from the BA, for the state of Florida, you're talking over 27,000 jobs. There's an economic impact of $3.6 billion. I mean, it's, we're moving up the list in rank in the country, and then that doesn't even really take into account all the sort of second and third tier impact that it has. So the craft beer bars and the distributing companies and the suppliers who have actually then built facilities here in Florida now because the business here has become so strong and powerful. So those are all things that that get taken into account. And then the local tax revenue, of course, is not insignificant, and real estate value, and it's something that draws, and it's sort of the intangibles that when you have several breweries in an area, it draws other businesses and it draws people to your town. So if you look at a town like Dunedin, or you look at a town like St. Pete, or
my favorite
Jacksonville,
or even like something small like Lake Park with Hall Powder,
for sure,
really led revitalization.
I probably never would have stopped in that part of Florida unless I had to get gas. But now I'm like, okay, that's on my list. So if I'm traveling, that direction, and, I know for me, of course, it's my job, but, anytime I go anywhere, I look to see what breweries are nearby. And sometimes I will pick one neighborhood over another because of the breweries. Mm-hmm. So I think that there are those kind of sort of intangible statistics that local governments and recognize. They know. I've had a number of cities reach out through either through their Chamber of Commerce or directly from their city council office, saying, how can we as a city attract breweries to our city to come build or open up in our city? Because they've done economic impact studies, and they all come back saying you should have a brewery because it's something that not only is great, but it helps define the city. It helps people go, oh yeah, that's where such and such is.
It's funny you mentioned that. I think this time a year ago we spoke with a city manager from Tavares, who had just put out an RFP for a brewery. I don't know how it's going, so I'd like to check back in, but I remember them doing that exact same thing. They gave a great package. They would waive all economic impact fees, which is phenomenal for a brewery to help, kind of anchor that downtown, which is great to see people opening. On the flip side of that, I know that we have just lost Mad Robot Brewing in Boca. They are shuttering their doors for good. They just announced that a few days ago. Yeah. Have you heard of a lot of other breweries that are going to go under or about to go under? And what do you think is going to happen as this continues on?
I heard about Mad Robot, and they're the first one that I've heard of that is basically you can attest they're closing to the COVID situation. I don't know of any others off the top of my head yet. Unfortunately, I think it's at this point it's inevitable. It's not a question of if, it's a question of how many. Yeah. And I'm hoping that the number is small. I know that a lot of these places operate on a real tight budget as it is, and they were able to survive the first round of shutdown. A lot of them did it by furloughing their staff and had just started bringing some people back on, and then to get hit with it again, there's going to be some that just can't survive it, and it's unfortunate. With looking at the way things are being managed and the way that the state is saying, okay, these are the numbers we're basing things on. Right now, they're basing things purely on number of cases, and so that's, if the cases do not start to decline real soon, they're going to extend this latest closure for another couple of weeks. And the more times that happens, the more breweries we're going to lose. And it's terrible. And that means, that's people's life savings. That's people's entire dream. And then, then there's all the people that, that worked for them that will now be out of work. And it's not like they can just go get hired someplace else, because everyone else is feeling that same impact and that same pressure. Yeah. So, and this has, there's a lot of, you can certainly ask questions about, the validity of using case numbers as the point, or whether you want to, and whether you should be using deaths or whether you should be using open beds, or, there's all these different metrics that, depending on your political persuasion, people like to use. But the fact is, until numbers start going down, we're going to see this continue. So it's a tough situation, and it's not looking real great at the moment. But things could turn around and start changing tomorrow. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, hopefully. And it's been interesting to hear how breweries have tried to make changes to survive. I know we've got a brew pub very close to me, both in terms of familiarity and distance. They aren't really sure if they're able to, but they've started to do growler fills. Is this something that the guild is hopefully going to be able to continue fighting for once all of this is over? Things of that nature.
I think we are going to see a significant change in the way that things are licensed, the way that things are interpreted. When, as awful as all of these things are, if there is a silver lining, it is thrown into sharp relief how lopsided and weird and, in some cases, nonsensical some of these rules are. Mm-hmm. And it is really shown, given a lot of times, in the past, we talked about, okay, well, we'd like to do this to make it easier. We'd like to do this. We'd like to deregulate this. And now we're able to show very concretely, this is something that doesn't really serve much of a purpose, and it nearly killed the industry. So let's take a look at that. This is an unnecessary burden on business. We should take a look at removing that. So things like that are definitely going to be on the table. I mean, there's really not going to be, there's nothing that will be off the table for sure, because when we can go and say, look, here's how many, and come March, we will unfortunately be able to have a list of the number of breweries that have closed and have the economic impact of here's how many jobs were lost. And, here's the revenue that was lost and all of that, the economic impact of that. And a lot of this could have been prevented if we'd had changes to certain legislation. So it's not going to be easy. Of course, there will always be opposition to any change, but some of the stuff is just that there's going to be too much evidence to in good conscience, vote against it.
Gotcha. And obviously, there's a lot of legislature that the Florida Brewers Guild is doing. In terms of the breweries themselves, what sort of support are you and the organization able to provide back to your members?
So a lot of what we do is making information and resources available. So by being able to locate, resources for whether it's helping employees, and that could be financially or with services or that sort of thing, by gathering up information and lists about, whether it's taxes or licensing or, just even tips and tricks. We're like, okay, you're shut down for the next month. Here's some things to go through this list to try to minimize the impact, as well as obviously, helping to interpret orders as they come out. That's probably the biggest question we get is when a new order comes out. People say, well, what does this mean? Does this apply to me? Or does this, can I do this? Can I do this is probably the number one question we've gotten since this all started. Then we also, we worked with Tampa Bay Beer Week and the Best Florida Beer organization and then Hopcloth to help fundraise for people who are out of work. And this was an idea that somebody had. So we basically were selling T-shirts saying, support your local bartender or support your local brewery. And so the T-shirts were sold, or they're still being sold. And all of the proceeds from that go to a general fund that then, if people are out of work, they can apply for it. And it's not, thousands of dollars, but it's $50 here, $50 there. And I know from my days of working in the service industry, that could make a difference of whether or not I eat this week. So, or gas in my car to find another job. So, small stuff like that, then working long-term towards, whether it's tax reform or permit reform, licensing stuff, and then just being available to the breweries when they have questions, when they have concerns, that's what, we're not in a position to be able to offer anybody financial assistance, but we can direct them to places that might.
Gotcha. I know that another program that you actually, or one of the board members, Jillian from 11 Brewing, started was Mental Wellness Mondays. What is that program and how has that been received by your member breweries?
So that's actually something that when I came on board in 2017, one of the first initiatives I really wanted to push was looking at mental health and substance abuse in our industry, because it's something that is there, but people don't talk about it. So when we had our very first conference, I put a panel together to discuss those issues. And there was some skepticism whether or not, A, if it was appropriate for a conference, and B, if anyone would be interested. Still today is the most highly attended session we've had in 3 years. And we put together people who were several mental health professionals, as well as some brewery owners and workers, and just to talk about these things openly and honestly, and then talk about resources. And it's something that I wanted to continue. We got great reception from it, and then I wanted it to continue. And it sort of languished for a while. And then we did another session in the following year, and again, it was really well received. And then coming at the beginning of this year, before COVID even started, from beginning of January to the beginning of March, we had 4 people in our industry take their own lives. And I said, you know what, that's it. I'm not going to wait, for something to happen. So I started putting together a committee for mental wellness. And again, bringing in, people from the industry as well as some mental health professionals that said, okay, we need to do something. We either, starting with something simple like putting a list of resources available on our website and making it available to people, letting people know that we're doing this, that we're taking this seriously. And when I put it together, actually, I asked Jillian if she would participate, and of course she said yes, because she's awesome. And then of course COVID hit, and it was like, okay, well, clearly this is something we're going to need even more than we realized. And as we were talking and putting things together, it takes time to put that kind of thing together, but it happened to coincide with the beginning of Mental Health Awareness Month. So that's how we started it was Jillian's idea with a Mental Wellness Monday. And the idea behind it is to just put out something like, hey, we know we all love the brewing industry. We all love to get together and drink beer. And but what else do you do in your life that makes you happy? What's your happy place? What's the thing that gives you joy and satisfaction, and that place where the stresses and stuff kind of get pushed to the side. And so we started with asking people from member breweries from around the state to just send us a picture and then a quick little story about what it is that they do and why. And it's been really, really well received. People have really identified with it. I think they recognize that this is something that we're that we believe in, and something that it's really important to, it's important to people in our industry. It's important that people know they can talk about it. The biggest thing for me is trying to remove that stigma about, talking about mental wellness, and the fact that a lot of us, we're not okay all the time. There are times where, and it's okay to not be okay. But what's important is that when you recognize that you're not okay, that you can do something about it. And whether that means talking to somebody or taking the necessary steps for yourself to, take a step back and do the thing that helps you get back to center, whatever it might be, that we can have those conversations and try to keep people as okay as we can.
Excellent. I guess kind of going back to a point that you had mentioned earlier, and we'll end with this. Obviously, you mentioned purchasing beer at the breweries as much as you can and talking to people's local legislators. Is there anything else that you think that we as average people can do to help protect and support craft beer in the state of Florida at such a strange and crazy time?
Those really are the two big things, because the immediate need for these breweries is revenue. For most of them, you can't go and sit and hang out and spend a weekend at the breweries. That's their primary revenue. Most breweries make the majority of their revenue selling out of their tap room. And so that's now cut off. They're entirely reliant on what they can sell to go. And that includes their merchandise, T-shirts, glassware, hats, all that kind of stuff too. Maybe you'll save $1 or $2 if you go pick up the beer from the grocery store. The margins that they make off of that are next to nothing compared to what you get buying it directly from them. So if you go and spend $10 at Publix for a six-pack of your favorite local beer, most of that ends up going back to Publix. If you go and spend $11 on that same 12-pack or same six-pack, all of that money goes back to the brewery. And I understand that, especially now, it's not always, not everybody's in the financial situation to be able to do that. And I totally understand and respect that. If you are in that situation, though, I highly encourage people to take the extra stop and go by the brewery. Plus, you can also get stuff at the brewery that you can't get in the grocery store, especially if they're doing growler releases and selling special bottles and stuff. A lot of breweries are doing, special releases just for this time. Part of it is they have to get rid of their beer. They can't just sit on it until things are okay. And also they want people to keep coming back. So they're offering up some new stuff. So that's, as far as the immediate need, that's really what people can do to help their brewery. And, keeping the pressure on legislators, paying attention when we start coming up closer to when the legislature's in session, we will definitely be putting out calls to action for our breweries as well as the general public, saying, here's the situation, here's what we're trying to do, and here's why you should care. By following the Florida Brewers Guild on our various social media stuff, you can sort of keep abreast of what it is that we're doing and why it's important.
Excellent. Sean Nordquist, Executive Director for the Florida Brewers Guild. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate your time.
It was my pleasure.
Your friends at the Florida Podcast Network want to use our platform to keep us all informed and connected. And while these conversations are greatly needed right now, and we hope they are helping you get through this trying time, we are podcast hosts, not experts in coronavirus or any other kind of medical issue. Please consult and follow the CDC's guidelines at cdc.gov. That's cdc.gov. Then please visit floridapodcastnetwork.com/coronavirus for some additional resources and ways to connect to your local community. With social distancing being our call to arms, we need to feel more connected than ever. So by visiting floridapodcastnetwork.com/coronavirus, you will help us all get through this with additional resources and ways to connect. Stay safe and healthy, and wash those hands.
Thank you so much for listening to our special coronavirus quarantine episode of the Florida Beer Podcast. We're going to try and get back to normal operation as soon as possible. In the meantime, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter. We're at Florida Beer Blog. We're on Facebook at FL Beer Blog, or email us at floridabeerblog@gmail.com. Florida Beer Podcast is a production of floridabeerblog.com and of the Florida Podcast Network. Field producer is Steve Pekala, and our executive producer and grandpa poobah is Jemmy Legagneur. Find us, rate us, buy local, and stay indoors and keep yourself safe through this very, very confusing time. Drink Florida craft.